Mr. Anderson, a man who had built his fortune through years of shrewd business decisions and a relentless work ethic, prided himself on being able to judge character. His mansion, a sprawling estate with high ceilings, marble floors, and priceless artwork, was a reflection of his success. However, behind the grandeur and luxury, Mr. Anderson harbored a deep mistrust of people. He believed that everyone had a price, and that integrity was a rare commodity in a world driven by greed. When Maria was hired as the new maid, Mr. Anderson's suspicions were immediately aroused. She was a quiet, unassuming woman, always polite and respectful. Her background check had come back clean, and she had excellent references, but Mr. Anderson was not easily convinced. He decided to put her to the test. One evening, after the household staff had retired for the night, Mr. Anderson walked into his private office. The room was his sanctuary, filled with expensive furnishings and personal mementos from his travels around the world. The centerpiece of the room was an intricately designed mahogany desk, behind which stood a large safe embedded into the wall. This safe held not only money, but also valuable documents, jewelry, and other items that represented his life's work. Mr. Anderson approached the safe with deliberate steps. He carefully turned the dial, the clicks echoing in the quiet room, and opened the heavy door. Inside, he placed a stack of crisp $100 bills at the very front, making sure they were visible even with the door slightly ajar. The sight of the money would be tempting to anyone, especially someone who might be struggling financially. He then set up a hidden camera, expertly concealed within a bookshelf that faced the desk. The camera was positioned perfectly, capturing the safe and anyone who might enter the room. Satisfied with his setup, Mr. Anderson closed the door behind him, leaving it unlocked, and retreated to his private quarters. The next morning, Maria arrived at the mansion promptly at 6 a.m., as she did every day. She was a woman in her late 30s, with dark hair tied back into a neat bun, and a face that showed the weariness of someone who had known hardship. Despite her modest appearance, there was a quiet dignity about her that Mr. Anderson had noticed. However, his skepticism clouded his judgment, and he could not help but wonder if Maria's humility was merely a facade. As Maria went about her duties, meticulously dusting the furniture and polishing the floors, she eventually made her way to Mr. Anderson's office. She had always been cautious around this room, aware that it was the one place in the mansion where she was to tread lightly. The grand office was filled with opulent furniture, expensive leather-bound books, and a large window that offered a view of the sprawling gardens outside. The room exuded power and wealth, a stark contrast to the modest living conditions Maria was accustomed to. As she entered, Maria noticed that the door to the safe was slightly ajar. Her heart skipped a beat. She had been warned by the head butler to never touch or even look too closely at the safe, as it was strictly off limits. For a brief moment, Maria hesitated, her hand frozen on the doorknob. She knew that leaving the safe open was a serious oversight and that she should inform Mr. Anderson immediately. But she also knew that she was not supposed to be in the office without explicit permission. After a moment's pause, Maria decided to do the only thing she felt was right. She walked over to the safe, keeping her eyes focused on the ground, and gently pushed the door shut. She didn't even glance at the money that was so clearly visible. To her, the safe represented something sacred, something that she had no business meddling with. It was not her place to question Mr. Anderson's belongings or his trust, even if it meant ignoring something potentially important. With the safe securely closed, Maria returned to her work, dusting the shelves and organizing the papers on Mr. Anderson's desk. She moved quietly, her footsteps muffled by the plush carpet, unaware that every move she made was being recorded. Meanwhile, Mr. Anderson was watching the footage from his hidden camera on a small screen in his private quarters. He had woken up early, eager to see the results of his little experiment. As he watched Maria enter the office, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as she approached the safe. He held his breath, fully expecting her to take the money or at least show some sign of temptation. But what he saw left him stunned. Maria did not even glance at the money. Instead, she simply closed the safe and continued her work as if nothing had happened. There was no hesitation, no curiosity, and no greed in her actions. She had passed his test, and in doing so, had revealed a level of integrity that Mr. Anderson had not anticipated. For a moment, Mr. Anderson felt a pang of guilt. He had set a trap for an innocent woman, someone who had done nothing but her job with honesty and diligence. He realized that his mistrust had led him to judge her unfairly, and that perhaps in his quest to protect his wealth, he had lost sight of what truly mattered. As he continued to watch Maria on the screen, he noticed something that made his heart sink even further. After closing the safe, Maria paused and reached into her pocket, pulling out a small, worn photo. It was a picture of two young children, their faces beaming with innocent smiles. Maria gazed at the photo for a long moment, her expression softening with a mixture of love and sorrow. It was clear that these children were her world, and that everything she did was for them. Mr. Anderson felt a lump form in his throat. He realized that Maria's integrity was not just a reflection of her character, but also of her deep love for her family. She was a woman who had faced hardship and poverty, yet had not allowed those circumstances to corrupt her values. She had passed his test, not because she was unaware of the money, but because she knew that no amount of wealth could ever replace the love she had for her children. This realization shook Mr. Anderson to his core. He had spent his life building his fortune, believing that wealth was the ultimate measure of success. But as he watched Maria tuck the photo back into her pocket and continue her work, he began to question the true value of his riches. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Anderson felt a sense of humility. He had learned a valuable lesson, not from his own experiences, but from the quiet dignity of a woman who had shown him what it truly meant to be rich. As Maria finished her duties in the office and quietly left the room, Mr. Anderson turned off the monitor. He sat in silence for a long time, reflecting on what he had seen. The test he had set for Maria had ended up being a test for himself, one that had revealed his own flaws and insecurities. He realized that he had much to learn from the people around him, and that true wealth was not measured by the contents of a safe, but by the strength of one's character. With a heavy heart, Mr. Anderson made a decision. He would no longer allow his mistrust and skepticism to dictate his actions. He would treat Maria with the respect and kindness she deserved, and he would find a way to repay her for the lessons she had unknowingly taught him. It was time for a change, not just in how he managed his household, but in how he viewed the world and the people in it. This chapter of Mr. Anderson's life marked the beginning of a transformation, one that would challenge his beliefs and ultimately lead him to discover what it truly meant to be wealthy. The morning after Mr. Anderson had set his test, he awoke with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. Despite the late hour at which he had gone to bed, his mind buzzing with thoughts about the hidden camera footage, he had slept uneasily. Now, the prospect of reviewing the recordings filled him with a strange sense of dread. This wasn't the first time he had tested an employee, but something about Maria was different. Perhaps it was her quiet demeanor, her humble nature, or the way she carried herself with a dignity that belied her modest circumstances. Whatever it was, it had planted a seed of doubt in Mr. Anderson's mind. He made his way to his private study, where the screen that displayed the camera footage awaited him. The room was dimly lit, the heavy drapes drawn against the morning light, creating an atmosphere of solitude and introspection. Mr. Anderson hesitated before sitting down at his desk, his hand hovering over the play button. He knew that what he was about to see could either confirm his suspicions or shatter them entirely. With a deep breath, he pressed play. The footage began with Maria entering the office, as she did every day, with a sense of purpose and quiet efficiency. She moved with practiced ease, her hands methodically dusting and tidying as she went about her work. Mr. Anderson watched intently, his eyes narrowing as she approached the safe. The moment of truth was at hand. Maria paused briefly when she noticed the safe was ajar. Mr. Anderson's heart raced as he leaned closer to the screen. He expected her to react with surprise, perhaps even to succumb to the temptation that lay before her. But what happened next caught him completely off guard. Instead of reaching for the money, Maria hesitated, as if weighing her options. Her face showed no greed, no desire for the wealth that was within arm's reach. Instead, there was a flicker of something else, concern perhaps, or even a sense of unease. She seemed almost reluctant to touch the safe, as though she understood the gravity of the situation. Mr. Anderson watched as Maria carefully pushed the door of the safe shut, her fingers lingering briefly on the metal surface before pulling away. She never once glanced at the money inside, nor did she show any interest in its contents. To her, the safe was simply another task to be managed, another responsibility in her long list of duties. The camera captured every moment in stark detail. The way Maria's brow furrowed slightly as she closed the safe. The way her hands trembled ever so slightly as she resumed her work. There was no indication that she had even considered taking the money, no sign that she was anything other than the honest, hardworking woman she appeared to be. But the most startling revelation came when Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. The camera zoomed in, capturing the image of two young children, a boy and a girl, their faces alight with joy. Maria's expression softened as she gazed at the photo, her eyes misting over with emotion. It was a tender moment, one that spoke volumes about her character and the depth of her love for her family. Mr. Anderson felt a lump form in his throat as he watched Maria tuck the photo back into her pocket. This simple act, so full of love and devotion, made him realize just how wrong he had been about her. She wasn't motivated by greed or ambition. She was driven by a profound sense of duty to her children, by the need to provide for them and give them a better life. The footage continued, but Mr. Anderson could hardly focus on the screen. His mind was reeling from the implications of what he had just witnessed. Maria's actions had shattered his preconceived notions about human nature and integrity. He had expected to catch her in an act of dishonesty, to confirm his belief that everyone had a price. Instead, he had been confronted with a level of integrity that he hadn't anticipated, one that challenged his own worldview. For a long time, Mr. Anderson sat in silence, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. He felt a deep sense of shame for having doubted Maria, for having set a trap that could have destroyed her life if she had chosen differently. He realized that his mistrust wasn't a reflection of her character, but of his own. In his pursuit of wealth and success, he had become cynical, unable to see the good in people without first testing them. As the footage ended, Mr. Anderson leaned back in his chair, his mind awash with conflicting emotions. The revelation that Maria was truly an honest, decent person shook him to his core. It forced him to confront the reality that he had allowed his wealth to warp his perception of the world and the people in it. He knew he had to make things right, not just with Maria, but with himself. He couldn't continue living in a state of constant suspicion and mistrust, always assuming the worst of those around him. If Maria had taught him anything, it was that there were still good people in the world, people who valued love, family, and integrity above all else. Determined to correct his mistake, Mr. Anderson resolved to speak with Maria that very day. He would apologize for his actions, for the trap he had set, and for the unfair judgment he had passed on her. More importantly, he would find a way to show her that her honesty had not gone unnoticed, that it was something he valued deeply, even if it had taken him longer than it should have to realize it. With a newfound sense of purpose, Mr. Anderson turned off the monitor and rose from his chair. The room felt different now, less like a fortress and more like a space where he could begin to make amends. As he walked towards the door, he knew that this was the start of a new chapter in his life, one where he would strive to be a better person, a more trusting and compassionate individual. And it all began with a simple revelation, one that had the power to change everything. The following day, Mr. Anderson awoke with a sense of unease, a feeling that had been growing ever since he watched the footage of Maria's actions. The events of the previous day had left him in turmoil, forcing him to confront aspects of himself that he had long ignored. His distrustful nature, the walls he had built around himself, and the way he viewed others were all under scrutiny. But the time for introspection was over. Now he had to act. As he dressed, Mr. Anderson felt the weight of the task ahead of him. Confronting Maria meant more than just acknowledging his mistake. It meant showing her a side of himself that few had ever seen. Vulnerability was not something he was accustomed to, and the thought of exposing it, even to someone as humble as Maria, was daunting. He walked to his office where the confrontation would take place. The room, which had always felt like a fortress, now seemed imposing in a different way. The rich mahogany furniture, the leather-bound books, the grand windows overlooking the gardens, all of it felt like a barrier between him and the humanity he was about to embrace. Mr. Anderson took a deep breath and sat behind his desk, the same desk where Maria had meticulously dusted and organized just the day before. The memories of the hidden camera footage played in his mind, particularly the moment when Maria had taken out the photograph of her children. That simple act, filled with love and devotion, had shattered his cold exterior and left him feeling exposed. With a determined yet apprehensive hand, Mr. Anderson pressed the intercom button on his desk and summoned Maria to his office. As he waited for her arrival, his mind raced with thoughts of how to begin, what to say, and how to convey the sincerity of his feelings without overwhelming her. Maria entered the office quietly as she always did, her demeanor calm and professional. She stood before him, her hands clasped in front of her, a look of mild curiosity on her face. It was clear she was unaware of the reason for this unexpected meeting, and Mr. Anderson could see a hint of apprehension in her eyes. "Mr. Anderson?" Maria asked softly, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. Mr. Anderson cleared his throat, feeling the weight of the words he was about to speak. "Maria, please, have a seat." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. She hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by the offer, but complied, sitting down with a quiet grace. The moment felt heavy, as if the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. Mr. Anderson struggled to find the right words, his usual confidence eluding him. He had rehearsed this conversation in his mind several times, but now that the moment was here, it felt far more difficult than he had anticipated. "Maria," he began, his voice tinged with a softness that surprised even himself. "I've asked you here because I need to apologize." Maria's eyes widened slightly, her composure wavering. She clearly hadn't expected this. "I'm sure you're wondering why I'm apologizing," Mr. Anderson continued, his gaze fixed on the polished surface of his desk, unable to meet her eyes just yet. "The truth is, I did something I'm not proud of. I tested you, Maria." Maria's brow furrowed in confusion. "Tested me, sir?" "Yes," Mr. Anderson admitted, finally looking up to meet her gaze. "I left the safe open yesterday, deliberately, to see if you would be tempted to take anything." A flash of understanding crossed Maria's face, followed by a look of hurt and disappointment. She opened her mouth to speak, but Mr. Anderson held up a hand, indicating that he wasn't finished. "I set up a hidden camera in this room to record your actions," he confessed, feeling the sting of guilt with every word. "I know it was wrong, and I see now that I allowed my own mistrust to cloud my judgment. I doubted your integrity, despite everything you've done to prove your worth." Maria sat in stunned silence, processing what she had just heard. The idea that her employer, the man who had hired her to take care of his home, had spied on her must have felt like a deep betrayal. Mr. Anderson could see the turmoil in her eyes, the hurt that his actions had caused, and it made him feel even smaller. "I want you to know," Mr. Anderson continued, his voice now steady with conviction, "that I deeply regret my actions. I've watched the footage, and I saw how you handled the situation. You didn't touch the money, you didn't even glance at it. Instead, you closed the safe and went about your duties, exactly as you should have. Your honesty, your integrity, they have left me in awe, Maria." Maria finally found her voice, though it was soft and uncertain. "Sir, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," Mr. Anderson interjected gently, "and that's what makes your actions all the more commendable. You could have taken that money and no one would have known. But you didn't. You chose the path of integrity, and for that, I am truly grateful." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, and then added, "Maria, I don't just want to apologize. I want to make amends. I'd like to offer you a raise as a token of my appreciation for your honesty, and I want to do more for you and your family. I've seen the photo you carry, and I understand the burden you must feel in providing for your children. If there's anything I can do to help, please, let me know." Maria's eyes filled with tears, her emotions finally breaking through the shock. She had come to work that morning, as she always did, expecting nothing more than another day of routine tasks. Now she was being confronted with an outpouring of emotion and kindness from a man who, until this moment, had been distant and formal. "Mr. Anderson," Maria began, her voice trembling slightly, I don't know what to say. I'm grateful for your words, for your offer, but I'm still trying to understand why you felt the need to test me. Have I done something to make you doubt me?" Mr. Anderson shook his head quickly, remorse evident in his expression. "No, Maria, you haven't. This test wasn't about you. It was about me. I've spent so much of my life building walls, protecting myself from being hurt or taken advantage of. I let that mistrust dictate my actions, and in doing so, I wronged you. Please believe me when I say that this isn't a reflection of your character, but of my own flaws." Maria nodded slowly, her expression softening as she listened to his explanation. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the regret that weighed heavily on him. Despite the hurt she felt, she couldn't deny that his words were genuine and that he was making a real effort to make things right. "Thank you, sir," Maria said quietly, her voice steadying as she spoke. "I appreciate your honesty, and I accept your apology. As for the raise and the offer to help my family, it's more than I ever expected, and I'm deeply grateful. But Mr. Anderson, please understand that I never took this job for the money. I took it because I needed to provide for my children. Yes, but also because I wanted to work in a place where I could be proud of what I do." Mr. Anderson felt a lump form in his throat once again. Maria's words, so humble and sincere, cut through the last of his defenses. He had misjudged her, and in doing so, he had failed to see the true value she brought to his life, not just as an employee, but as a person of integrity and strength. "I understand, Maria," Mr. Anderson said softly, "and I want you to know that you have my utmost respect. From this day forward, I will do everything in my power to ensure that you feel valued and appreciated here. You've taught me a lesson I will never forget, and for that, I thank you." Maria smiled through her tears, a small but genuine smile that spoke of forgiveness and a newfound understanding between them. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. "I'll continue to do my best, for you and for my family." With that, the conversation came to a close. But the impact of it would linger, not just in the room, but in the hearts of both Mr. Anderson and Maria. The confrontation, though difficult and emotional, had brought about a change that neither of them had expected. It had broken down the barriers of mistrust and suspicion, replacing them with mutual respect and a deeper understanding of one another. As Maria left the office to resume her duties, Mr. Anderson sat in silence, reflecting on the events that had transpired. He knew that he had a long way to go in overcoming his own flaws, but this moment was a start towards becoming the man he wanted to be, a man who valued integrity, compassion, and the people who made his life better in ways that money could never buy. The days following Mr. Anderson's heartfelt apology to Maria marked the beginning of a profound transformation in his life. The experience had shattered the rigid walls of suspicion and cynicism that had defined him for so long. The realization that wealth and status were meaningless without integrity and human connection resonated deeply within him. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a world he had long ignored, a world where kindness, respect, and empathy held more value than any amount of money. Mr. Anderson began by making changes in his immediate surroundings. He spent time reflecting on the way he had treated his employees, recognizing the cold detachment with which he had managed his estate. His staff had always respected him, but it was out of duty rather than admiration. He saw now that he had never truly known them, never taken the time to understand their lives, their struggles, and their aspirations. It was a stark realization, one that filled him with regret. Determined to change, Mr. Anderson called a meeting with all of his household staff. The employees, accustomed to his formal and distant demeanor, were surprised by the warmth and humility in his voice as he addressed them. He spoke of the lessons he had learned from the incident with Maria, admitting his faults openly. He expressed his deep appreciation for their hard work and dedication, acknowledging that he had failed to recognize their contributions properly. "As of today," Mr. Anderson said, his voice steady with resolve, "things will be different around here. I want each of you to know that your work matters, that you matter. From now on, I will do my best to ensure that this estate is not just a place of employment, but a place where you feel valued and respected." The staff listened in stunned silence, exchanging glances of disbelief. This was not the Mr. Anderson they had known, the man who had always been more concerned with efficiency and results than with the people who made those results possible. But as they looked at him now, they could see the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine desire to change. It was clear that this was not a fleeting moment of guilt, but a deep and lasting shift in his character. Over the weeks that followed, Mr. Anderson made good on his promise. He took the time to learn about each of his employees, their backgrounds, their families, their dreams. He found out that the gardener, Mr. Collins, had a passion for painting, and he arranged for an art studio to be set up on the estate, where Mr. Collins could pursue his hobby in his free time. He discovered that the cook, Mrs. Fletcher, had always wanted to attend culinary school, so he offered to sponsor her tuition, allowing her to take courses on the weekends. These gestures were not just acts of charity, they were expressions of a newfound respect for the people who had dedicated their lives to making his estate run smoothly. Mr. Anderson realized that his wealth could be used to uplift those around him, to provide opportunities and support in ways that went beyond mere wages. The atmosphere in the mansion began to change, becoming warmer, more collegial. The staff, once reserved and formal, now felt comfortable engaging with Mr. Anderson on a personal level, sharing their thoughts and ideas without fear of retribution. But the most significant change was in Mr. Anderson himself. The man who had once been driven solely by the pursuit of wealth and success now found joy in the simple pleasures of life. He took time to enjoy the gardens he had once overlooked, marveling at the beauty of the flowers that Mr. Collins so lovingly tended. He savored the meals prepared by Mrs. Fletcher, appreciating the care and creativity she put into every dish. He even began to host small gatherings for his staff, where they could relax and enjoy each other's company without the constraints of their professional roles. As for Maria, the impact of Mr. Anderson's transformation was profound. With the raise and support he had offered, she was able to move her family out of their cramped apartment and into a modest but comfortable home. Her children, who had once struggled in school due to the challenges of their environment, now thrived in their new surroundings. Maria's son, Lucas, had always been a bright student, but the stress of their financial situation had weighed heavily on him. With the stability that Mr. Anderson's help provided, Lucas was able to focus on his studies, eventually earning a scholarship to a prestigious university. Maria's daughter, Sophia, who had always loved music, was able to pursue her passion with Mr. Anderson's encouragement. He arranged for her to take piano lessons with a renowned instructor, recognizing her talent and potential. Sophia's joy and enthusiasm were infectious, and her progress brought immense pride to both her family and Mr. Anderson, who saw in her a reminder of the beauty that could flourish when given the right support. The relationship between Maria and Mr. Anderson evolved into something far deeper than that of employer and employee. It became a bond of mutual respect and understanding, forged through shared experiences and the recognition of each other's humanity. Maria, who had always been humble and reserved, found herself becoming more confident, more assured in her place in the world. She no longer saw herself as just a maid. She was a mother, a provider, and a woman of integrity who had earned the respect of a man she had once seen as distant and unapproachable. Mr. Anderson, in turn, learned invaluable lessons from Maria. Her resilience, her dedication to her family, and her unwavering honesty served as constant reminders of the values he had lost sight of in his pursuit of wealth. She showed him that true success was not measured by the size of one's bank account, but by the impact one had on the lives of others. As time passed, the changes in Mr. Anderson's life became evident to those around him, even outside the walls of his mansion. He began to engage more with his community, using his resources to support local charities and initiatives that benefited those in need. He became a mentor to young entrepreneurs, not just teaching them the tricks of the trade, but also instilling in them the importance of integrity, empathy, and social responsibility. The people who had once viewed Mr. Anderson as aloof and unapproachable now saw him as a man of wisdom and compassion. His transformation inspired others to reevaluate their own lives, to consider how they could use their own resources, whether financial, intellectual, or emotional, to make the world a better place. In the end, the incident with Maria was not just a test of her character, but a catalyst for a much-needed change in Mr. Anderson's life. It was a reminder that no matter how successful or wealthy one might become, it is the connections we make with others, the kindness we show, and the respect we give that truly define us. Mr. Anderson's journey from suspicion and isolation to empathy and connection was a testament to the power of personal growth and the human capacity for change. He had learned that life was not just about accumulating wealth, but about building relationships, helping others, and finding joy in the everyday moments that make life worth living. As he walked through the gardens one evening, the sun setting in a blaze of color, Mr. Anderson felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. The world, once a place of competition and mistrust, now seemed full of possibilities, full of opportunities to connect, to give, and to grow. And in that moment, he knew that this was just the beginning, a new beginning, not just for him, but for everyone whose lives he had touched, and who had touched his in return. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the story and share any themes or ideas you'd like to hear in future stories. Your feedback means the world to me. Thanks for watching.